In this exercise, we are going to take a look at making animated couples poses for a furniture item using IMVU's Toolkit for Blender. So, as always, we need to start from a clean scene just to make sure that we are reset. Then we want the toolkit. So sidebar. There's the toolkit. And we want the animation tool for this. That will drop in the rigged avatar. Both male and female use the same skeletal structure. So even though it's showing the female avatar, this rig works for both. So right now the control rig, which are all these little shapes, these wireframes, these control individual elements of the avatar. But right now it's in object mode, which is indicated by the orange outline. To create a pose, we need to be in pose mode. So all we need to do is just make sure the armature or the control rig is selected, and then switch the interaction mode from object mode to pose mode. That will change the appearance of the rig so that all the little control elements take on a different color. Basically, blue represents one side, red represents the other. And basically, all we need to do to create a pose is select and move one of these control shapes. So we've got G key moves, R key rotates. So we can also use, that's free move and free rotate. We can also use the widgets, which lock us to our orientation axes, so X, Y, and Z. But before we actually create the pose, what we want to do in the toolkit panel is make sure auto insert or auto key is enabled. This will save us some time because it will automatically insert a keyframe. Whenever one of these is moved, it'll drop in a marker into the timeline. So we don't have to manually do that. If we were to manually do that, we would have to be in the key menu and then insert keyframe, all channels or selected channels. There are various options, or in the 3D view, so that's the key menu in the action editor, or pose menu, animation, insert keyframe, and it'll insert all the active data for that position. So auto key just does that for us automatically. So let's create a quick pose. Grab the hand. So we're going to use the shortcut keys again. That's G to move, R to rotate. I'm just going to create a simple pose. Let's do shaking the avatar by the shoulders. So we need to set the first pose. Elbows. Let's do some other adjustments. So all we're doing is selecting the individual components and using the shortcut key or the widgets. Toggling between each of them just to create a simple pose. So that's going to be our basic pose. So this is our starter frame. What we want to do is copy this, but first we need to select everything, select all, pose, copy pose, and then move the timeline scrubber, that's this blue thing, or the timeline widget to frame 50. Pose, paste pose. That will drop in keyframes. So essentially what we've got is a very basic sequence, albeit with one pose across the 50 frames. So to make this an animated pose, what we can do is click at frame 25, and let's move the hands forwards. So if we just click drag the timeline back and forth, we get a very simple pose. Obviously, if we want this to be more complicated, what we can do is change some of the other bones. The head. And again, because this is frame 1, we want to select all, copy the pose, and drop that in frame 50. Paste. But because these control surfaces that we just manipulated didn't have any other manipulations before we did that, it's carried that data across all the frames. So to make a difference, what we can do is select the control surface and just zero the bone. Click on that and it just zeros, so that we have a change in our avatar. Let's move the avatar forward. So now this is what we've got. Let's move the head up. We can copy paste individual bone movements. Copy. So that's Control C, Control V. Control C, copy, Control V, paste. Click, Control V, and it copies it into place. So that's our pose. So we'll take that as pose 1. So before we save, let's rename this. Click type, avatar 1 dot action. This is just so that we can see at a glance which sequence is which sequence when we export all of these. Enter, and we also want to enable the shield or unique user so that it locks everything in the file. So that's going to be our pose. Pose 1. Right, save the file. File, save as Toolkit couples animated furniture 1. Save as. Right, so that's pose 1. For pose 2, we're going to exit pose mode, go into object mode, and we need to select everything on screen. But we need to do this not by dragging out a selection box. We need to select all. Select all, because it's crucial that we encapsulate or capture, anim, and morph in the selection that we make. And that's not possible if we just use click drag. It misses or omits animation or anim, and we need that in order for this to work. So select all, then we can see it's now included. So once we've got all of that, we can go into Object, Duplicate Objects, and this is going to duplicate everything on screen and the elements that are essentially hidden from view but necessary. So Object, Duplicate Objects, and we can double check that by watching the avatar. If it remains intact as it is now, everything's okay. If it doesn't and the avatar distorts, it means we've missed the anim capture. So now that we've got that, press Escape just to reset. And before we do anything, we need to go into Object again and move this to its own collection. Move to collection, and then here we create a collection. Just call this proxy. Enter, create. That will create a collection and drop everything into it. So let's just collapse these in the outliner so that we can see what we're looking at. And there are our duplicates. What this means is that we've now got 2 control rigs in the scene. So we can hide our proxy, and we can also hide the control rig, or unhide the proxy, because what we can do here now is select the proxy control rig, and in copying all of this, it's also duplicated the action. What we want to do here is assign the original, so this is a duplicate of that, which is why it's been appended .001. We want the original. So browse, action to be linked. There's our original. We need to drop that in place. So now this sequence has 2 users. That is both control rigs. So the proxy and the actual rig that's used for creating and exporting our poses. So what we can do here is click on the 2 and make this unique, or we can click on New Action. This will duplicate this sequence but create a new instance of it in either case. So we can now click, type, rename, enable user, shield. What this means, so if we enable the other control rig, so we have our proxy control rig selected and the new sequence that's associated with that. Because what we can do now is go back into pose mode, and we can move this or animate it, and the original rig will stay put. So all we need to do now is pose this. So make sure that the marker is at frame 1. We can now pose this relative to the original pose. So we're going to just move this off the base plate. Animate same way that we did with the original. So again, we're creating a pose. We don't necessarily need to match the first pose because we can make adjustments to both of them now. So we have 2 control rigs. So again, same process as before. Just create a quick pose. Heads back because they're being shoved. So we need to copy this. So select all. Again, Control C, Control V. Frame 50. Paste, Control V. So we've now got our 2 duplicates. So we want this reacting at the midpoint. So this is where it can get tricky to see what's going on because we've got two wireframes. So what we can do is hide either or control armature. So if we're working on one, we can hide one. If we're working on the other, we can hide that. This just makes it easier to see where all the bones are. So let's make some adjustments. We can copy paste individual controls. So Control C, Control V. Again, Control C, Control V. Control C, Control V. So that'll be the basis of our two poses. So we need to make some adjustments to pose 1. So toggle out of pose mode, object mode, unhide, hide, select, pose mode. Make some adjustments to the hands. Just put those on the shoulders like so. So again, need to copy that from frame 50. So shift click for multiple control surfaces. Control C, Control V. Check the positions. We can move 2 at the same time. Then individually. Check their position on the outside, on the outside. So now our hands match up to the shoulders. So those are our two poses. Let's just do another quick tweak. Don't need this one, which is angling the foot, so we can 0 the bone. Again, copy, frame 50, paste. Those are our poses. So let's save this, save increment, file, save increment. So just to recap what we've got, we have two avatar rigs, both referencing a set, or two in this case, a set of avatar actions that will be exportable. Both avatars are positioned relative to their origin point, so that's grid center in Blender. So for our furniture item, we need to make sure that this also corresponds to the center or the root of our furniture item. So what this means in practice is that we need two seat nodes at the furniture item's root that are in exactly the same location, because the avatar's positions relative to each other are determined by the pose, not the position of the seat nodes. In other words, we don't need to do anything special to the furniture setup, the skeleton setup, other than dropping in our seat nodes and making sure that they are positioned exactly in relation to each other. So again, at grid 0 in this particular instance. So if we were to export these now, the way that we would do this, because we have the two rigs, one of these, as discussed, is the master rig. If we hide our proxy, what we have is the master rig, and this is the one that's used to export our actions. And the way that we do that is that now that we have our two actions, all we need to do is select the master rig and just toggle the assignment of those actions that we've created to the master rig, and then just export. So the export button in the toolkit. So let's do that. So avatar 1, in our settings we want to make sure that we have those set. So we want export all bones, and we can optionally disable morph controls because we haven't morphed the face of the avatars. So that's optional. We can leave that checked as is. Then all we need to do, scroll down to the toolkit, export. That configures the file and confirms our export. Now select the avatar rig again, select the second sequence, same process, export. So now we have two FBX files. So let's save this and set up the furniture file. So for the furniture, we just need to start from a clean scene, toolkit, furniture tool. So this is the template. We don't need the reference object, so we can hide that. What we want to do is drop in, so we can select the furniture export folder and drop in add mesh plane. Just going to drop in a simple mesh to create a marker. So that will drop in the mesh into the furniture export folder or collection because we had that selected. Otherwise it'll drop it into scene collection, and then we would need to just move it into place. And for that we would select the mesh, object, collection, move to collection, and then move it into furniture export, but we've already done that. So there's our mesh, simple material. We can use an existing material, so browse material to be linked. There is material, rename, so let's call this marker, space, square brackets, 0, close square brackets. preview. Shading workspace. Going to add texture, image texture. So drop that node into place, click on open, and we're going to load in an existing image. Browse to something, let's select armband, open image. That will drop that into place, and then click drag color to base color. There is our image. That's all we need to do. Layout. So that's our furniture item, it's just a marker. So now what we need to do is add our seating. So we've got the defaults, idle, standing, sitting. For this, because we have custom poses, we want to use the custom settings. And here, all we need to do is click, type, avi underscore, we've got two poses, so we want two seat nodes. So avi underscore a, enter, click on custom. That will add a set of seat nodes. So we have the seat node, capture and picture, and the handle. Let's just move the handle to one side because we don't want both handles for both seat nodes in the same location. So widgets, all control snap to the grid, just move that to one side. That's all we need to do. Second set. So we'll change avi to avi underscore b. Click on custom again. That'll drop in our second set. Same again, move the handle to one side. So hold control, snap to the grid. And that is our furniture. That's all we need to do. And let's just double check our setup. So root, avatar nodes, there are our seats. And there is our mesh. So let's just rename this. So double click. We'll call this marker.mesh. This just makes it obvious what's what as we assemble it. So let's save this. File, save as. Couples animated furniture underscore 1. Save as. So for the furniture item, we don't need to do anything else. We can now export. So click on export. That'll confirm the creation of our furniture file. And then we can assemble our FBX file. So we've got one for the FBX and two for each of the poses. We can import those into Studio and assemble our product. So in Studio, create our project. Rooms and furniture, furniture, empty furniture item, select, derive, and because we are setting up a furniture item, generally speaking, we want to import the pose files first and then the furniture item, because the poses include a skeleton that will override the furniture skeleton if that's set up first. So we want to import the FBX files. So import FBX. And we want avatar 1 and avatar 2. So bring them in one at a time. That's what it's found in the file. Set up FBX. No meshes. No materials. We only want one action. So review, import. So that's pose 1. Import, repeat the process, pose 2, open. Again, that's what it's found. Set up FBX. No meshes, no materials. One action, review, import. So there are our two action sequences. So now furniture, so import FBX. The furniture is fern will be prepended fern, whereas the animations were prepended animation. Fern, couples, animated furniture. So it's that one. So open. That's what it's found. Same again, set up FVX. This time we want to set the mesh ID to 0. That's the default for furniture. Next. There is our material. Next. No animation. Review. So that's what it's going to bring in. And then import. So there is our very simple furniture item, and it has our 2 seat nodes. So our 2 handles to the side, to either side of our mesh. So all we need to do now is go into component, action, and set up our actions. So plus creator action, name trigger. This is the name of the seat node. So stance dot avi underscore a. Action type, that's okay. Ensemble. In asset, we should have our sequences. We do. So there is our first one, and these are 50 frames. So start at frame 1, end at frame 50. Loops infinitely, so 0. Everything else is okay. We can leave disable gaze disabled. Apply, preview. And what we should find is that when we mouse over one of these spots, we'll get our pose, which we do. So click on that, and there is our first sequence. So repeat the process. Action. Same again. Stance dot, this is avi underscore b. Enter. New ensemble, and we want the other animation sequence. Same again, frame 1, frame 50, and loop 0. Everything else is okay. Apply, preview. So now we should have both sequences. So if we go into avatars, we'll load in another avatar. There are our poses in action, but we can see that they're not synchronized. So actions, or action, down at the bottom here, we want all actions. Enable, preview, and there is our animated couples pose. So let's just save this file, save as animated couples, well, furniture, save. So obviously if we were happy with this, we would then just go into the info tab, set all the properties, and then submit. So what if we want the avatars to be facing each other? In other words, they're going to be posed in opposition. How do we do that? So back in Blender, let's load up the animation file. So the way that we do this, we want to turn the avatars so they face each other, so they're in opposition. So if we look at the widget at the bottom here, this gives us an orientation forward. We want the other avatar to be facing backwards, essentially facing the main avatar. So how do we do that? Well, first let's enable our proxy, select it, and then in object mode, so again this is another crucial element of this process, in object mode we rotate the rig, the entire rig. So rotate, Alt Control snap to the grid, And just rotate it round 180 or however many degrees it needs to be rotated for the pose. Let go. So we still have avatar 2 action associated with this. So let's rename this so that we create new sequences that won't override the ones we've already created. 2, 1, and then 1, 2. Let's save this before we go any further. Save incremental. Now, we've rotated the avatar. What we need to do now to get the avatar positioned relative to the master, we need to toggle into pose mode and grab everything. So select all, shift click the root, so we don't want this to move. That will deselect it. Might need to do that twice, once to activate it and again to deselect it. And then we move the remaining selection into position. So this is at frame 50. And we can see what happens. So we need to copy that. So again, Control C, Control V, and then Control V again in the middle, because we can always, is what we're going to do now, modify this pose. Frame 1. So let's copy the foot. Control C, Control V, Control V. So Control C, Control V, Control V. So let's lift this up. Control C, Control V. Move the hands into position. So drop out of pose mode, object mode, select the other avatar, object mode, pose mode. Like so. So again, copy those. Shift click, Control C, Control V. Change the elbows. Maybe bring it in a little bit further. So now, let's check. So select all, copy, paste, frame 25. Adjust the hands, everything else is okay. So now that is going to be our poses. A very awkward shove, or the start of a shove. So let's save this file, save increment, and the same process applies. So we've renamed our actions so that we don't overwrite the original ones that we created. But we can do the same thing again. So back out of pose mode into object mode, select the master rig. Let's hide the proxy rig. And then we're doing the same thing again, applying the action sequences to the avatar. And if this rotates, we don't need to worry about that because the position, rotation, location of the avatar is saved with the skeleton. So the bones, this is what determines the orientation of the avatar, not the object. So when we're in object mode, this is ignored by IMVU. So all we need to do is export. So make sure we've got our options set. This time we're going to disable morph controls. Make sure the avatar is selected and then export. So that's sequence 1, select the avatar, avatar 2, export. So that's what we need to do to the poses to make the adjustment. But we also need to make some adjustments to the furniture item. So let's just save increment on this and reload the furniture file. And for this, all we need to do, easiest done in Outliner, select AVB, that's the seat node, and use rotate, hold control, snap to the grid, and we need to rotate this around the opposite direction. What we might also want to do, expand, select handle, move that because we don't want both of them in the same place. So let's save this and then export. That's all we need to do for the furniture item. So in Studio, we can reassemble the project. So in IMVU Studio, we want to create a new project. So click on the plus or back in the home screen, click on Create. Same again, rooms of furniture, furniture, empty furniture. And similarly, import the pose files first. So anim 1121. So open, setup FBX, no meshes, no materials. And this time we've only got the action, which is what we want. Review, import. So that's pose 1. Pose 2, so no meshes, no materials. There is action 2, review, import. So we've got our poses, import FBX, and the final one is our new furniture item. There it is. Open. Set up FBX. Mesh ID 0. There's our material. No animations. Import. So this time we have the avatars facing each other. So component, action, new action, stance.avi_a, new ensemble, avi12, 150 and 0, apply, preview. So there's animation 1. That's still using the default. Stance.avi_b. Action 2. 150, 0, apply, preview. And there is the second pose. So let's drop in an extra avatar. Avi1, Avi2. So that, remember, synchronization, all actions. That's how we get the avatars to face each other when we are creating animated couples poses. So we do not rotate the pose in pose mode. We rotate the entire rig in object mode. That's the crucial point. And then all we do is export and then assemble everything in IMVU. But that is creating our couples poses. So we can create furniture items using the toolkit.